In 1992, 12 students vanished from their beds at Ashworth Academy, one of New England's most prestigious boarding schools. No alarms sounded. No doors were forced. Their beds were made, their belongings untouched, as if they had simply evaporated into the Vermont winter night. For 32 years, the school buried the truth beneath layers of silence and legal settlements. Until last month, when renovation workers broke through a sealed wall and discovered something that should have stayed hidden forever. Welcome to Lost Mystery Stories. Before we uncover the dark secret that Ashworth Academy has been hiding for over 3 decades, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like someone was watching you in a place that was supposed to keep you safe? And if you believe that some institutions protect power over truth, hit that subscribe button because this story will expose the price of silence in America's elite schools. November 15, 1992. Ashworth Academy, Vermont. Ashworth Academy had been molding the children of America's elite for over a century. Senators' sons, CEOs' daughters, old money families who valued tradition above all else. The school's Gothic stone building sat on 300 acres of pristine Vermont countryside, far from prying eyes and uncomfortable questions. The 12 students who disappeared that night weren't troublemakers or rebels. They were model students, honor roll achievers, student council members, debate team champions. The kind of students Ashworth used in their recruitment brochures. They were the cream of the crop, said Dr. Margaret Whitman, who taught psychology at Ashworth in 1992. Brilliant, well-behaved, from the best families. That's what made their disappearance so impossible to understand. The students ranged in age from 14 to 17, spanning all 4 grades. What they had in common wasn't just academic excellence. They had all been selected for a special program called Advanced Cognitive Development, a pilot curriculum that promised to unlock human potential through experimental teaching methods. The ACD program was invitation only, Dr. Whitman explained. Students were chosen based on psychological profiles, family background, and what the administration called adaptive capacity. We were told it was educational research at the highest level. The program met 3 nights a week in the school's oldest building, Founders Hall, a Gothic structure that predated the main campus by 50 years. The basement had been converted into specialized classrooms with sophisticated equipment that seemed advanced for 1992. Computers, monitoring devices, and what appeared to be medical equipment. I was never allowed in those basement rooms, Dr. Whitman said. Only Dr. Reeves had access, and he was very secretive about the curriculum. Said it was proprietary research that couldn't be discussed with other faculty. Dr. Marcus Reeves had arrived at Ashworth in September 1992, just 2 months before the disappearance. He claimed to have credentials from Harvard and MIT, though when investigators later tried to verify his background, they found no record of his employment at either institution. November 15th was a Sunday night. The 12 ACD students had attended their regular evening session in Founders Hall from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. According to the official schedule, they returned to their dormitories for study hall and lights out at 11 p.m. But something happened between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. that defied explanation. When dormitory supervisors conducted their morning room checks, they found 12 empty beds. Not slept-in beds. The covers were pulled tight, corners squared with military precision. Personal belongings sat exactly where they should be. Textbooks stacked neatly, uniforms hanging in closets, family photos on nightstands. It was like they had never existed, said Thomas Carlyle, who was a senior at Ashworth in 1992 and lived in the same dormitory as 3 of the missing students. But we all remembered them. We'd had classes with them, eaten meals with them. They were real. The missing students were Sarah Blackwood, 17, student body president, daughter of a federal judge. Michael Chin, 16, valedictorian track, son of a pharmaceutical CEO. Emma Rothschild, 15, debate champion, daughter of an investment banker. David Ashford, 17, editor of school newspaper, son of a congressman. Lisa Martinez, 14, youngest student ever accepted to ACD program. James Wellington, 16, captain of chess team, grandson of a Supreme Court justice. Anna Kosowski, 15, student council treasurer, daughter of a diplomat. Robert Hayes, 17, academic scholarship recipient, first in family to attend private school. Caroline Pierce, 14, mathematics prodigy, daughter of a tech mogul. Timothy Brooks, 16, science fair champion, son of a university president. Rachel Goldman, 15 literary magazine editor, daughter of a media executive. Nathan Cross, 17 pre-med track, son of a pharmaceutical researcher. School administration called the police at 7:30 a.m. By 8 a.m., the Vermont State Police had cordoned off the campus. By noon, the FBI had taken over the investigation. The FBI investigation was led by Special Agent Victoria Lane, a specialist in missing children cases. What she found at Ashworth Academy raised immediate red flags. The school's cooperation was selective, Agent Lane wrote in her case notes, released through FOIA requests in 2024. They provided access to some areas while claiming others were off-limits due to structural issues or ongoing maintenance. Founders Hall, where the ACD program operated, was declared unsafe for investigation due to potential asbestos contamination. The basement classrooms were sealed with plastic sheeting and warning signs, preventing FBI access to the area where the students had spent their final evening. Dr. Marcus Reeves had vanished as completely as his students. His office was cleaned out, his personnel file was missing, and his apartment in town had been professionally cleaned. No fingerprints, no personal belongings, no trace he had ever lived there. It was the most thorough disappearance I'd ever seen, Agent Lane noted. Not just the students but every trace of the program they'd been involved in. Files, equipment, records, all gone. The school's headmaster, Dr. Edmund Ashworth III, great-grandson of the school's founder, provided carefully worded statements that revealed nothing. The Advanced Cognitive Development Program had been temporarily suspended pending evaluation. Dr. Reeves had resigned to pursue other opportunities. The missing students had likely suffered some form of group psychological crisis leading to voluntary departure. Dr. Ashworth spoke like a lawyer, Agent Lane observed. Every word was measured, every answer was rehearsed. He wasn't cooperating, he was performing damage control. The investigation stalled after 6 weeks. No physical evidence, no witnesses, no leads. The case was officially suspended, though it remained open on paper. But Agent Lane's final report contained a disturbing notation: recommend continued surveillance of Ashworth Academy. Multiple indicators suggest institutional knowledge of student disappearances and active obstruction of federal investigation. What made the Ashworth case unique wasn't just the disappearance itself, it was the response of the families involved. 12 prominent families, each with significant wealth and political connections, all reacted to their children's disappearance in exactly the same way. They hired the same law firm, issued identical statements through the same PR company, and then fell completely silent. It was coordinated, said investigative journalist Sarah Connor, who covered the case for the Washington Post in 1992. 12 families don't all hire the same legal team and make identical statements by coincidence. Someone was orchestrating their response. The law firm, Whitmore, Kemp & Associates, specialized in crisis management for wealthy clients. Their standard practice was to minimize media exposure and protect family privacy through legal action against journalists and investigators. Within 3 months of the disappearance, all 12 families had received substantial settlements from Ashworth Academy's insurance carrier. The terms were sealed under strict non-disclosure agreements, but court documents showed payments ranging from $2 million to $5 million per family. They were paid to stay quiet, Connor concluded. And it worked. After the settlements, not one family spoke publicly about their missing children again. The Blackwood family moved to Switzerland. The Chens relocated to Singapore. The Rothschilds transferred to London. One by one, the families left the country, taking their silence with them. Only one family broke ranks. Robert Hayes' parents, working-class people from upstate New York who couldn't afford the high-powered legal representation the other families had hired. They offered us money, Robert's mother, Patricia Hayes, said in a 1995 interview. $2 million to sign papers saying we wouldn't talk about Bobby or what happened at that school. When we refused, they destroyed us. The Hayes family was sued for defamation, harassment, and violation of privacy by Ashworth Academy. They lost their home, their savings, and eventually their marriage. Patricia Hayes died in 2003, still fighting to find out what happened to her son. She never stopped believing Bobby was alive somewhere, said her sister, Marie Donovan. She used to say the school was hiding something, that all those rich families knew what happened but were too scared to speak up. Fast forward to October 2024. Ashworth Academy had evolved with the times, adding modern dormitories and technology centers while preserving its historic facade. Enrollment had declined over the decades, and the school needed to renovate older buildings to remain competitive. Founders Hall, sealed since 1992 due to structural concerns, was finally slated for renovation. The construction crew was led by Mike Torres, a contractor who specialized in historic building restoration. The place felt wrong from the moment we walked in, Torres said. It wasn't just old, it felt abandoned, like it had been frozen in time for 30 years. The main floors contained typical classrooms and offices, though covered in decades of dust. But when the crew reached the basement level, they encountered something unexpected, a wall that didn't appear on any architectural plans. It was a professional job, Torres explained. Someone had bricked up an entire section of the basement and painted over it to match the existing walls. If you didn't know to look for it, you'd never notice it was there. Torres' team was hired to renovate, not investigate, but the sealed wall presented a problem. Their plans called for installing new electrical and plumbing systems that would require access to the entire basement level. We had to know what was behind that wall before we could proceed, Torres said. So we got permission from the school to break through. What they found changed everything. Behind the false wall was a complex of rooms that shouldn't have existed. The basement of Founders Hall was significantly larger than any architectural plans indicated, extending deep underground in a network of corridors and chambers that had been expertly concealed for over 3 decades. It wasn't just a basement, Torres said. It was a facility. Medical equipment, observation rooms, holding cells, and laboratories that looked like something out of a science fiction movie. The FBI was called immediately. Special Agent David Chin, no relation to the missing Michael Chin, arrived within hours with a team of forensic specialists. What we found was a fully operational research facility, Agent Chin said. Not a school basement, a sophisticated laboratory designed for human experimentation. The hidden complex contained 12 isolation chambers, each equipped with one-way observation windows, audio monitoring, and what appeared to be gas delivery systems. A surgical suite with equipment for brain monitoring and what forensic experts identified as electroshock therapy devices. A pharmaceutical laboratory with industrial-grade equipment for drug manufacturing and testing. Multiple observation rooms with recording equipment and files containing detailed behavioral analysis. A crematorium disguised as a heating system, complete with bone fragment residue. But the most disturbing discovery was a sealed archive room containing thousands of documents, photographs, and recorded sessions detailing what had really happened to the missing students. The recovered documents revealed that the Advanced Cognitive Development Program was a front for Project Mindbridge, a covert research operation studying the effects of psychological manipulation and pharmaceutical conditioning on adolescent subjects. It was systematic mind control experimentation using children from wealthy families, Agent Chin explained. They weren't just kidnapping random kids, they were targeting specific subjects whose families had the influence to cover up any investigation. Dr. Marcus Reeves wasn't an educator, he was a neuroscientist who had been quietly conducting illegal human experimentation for over a decade. His real name was Dr. Martin Russo, and he had previously worked for pharmaceutical companies developing psychiatric medications before losing his medical license in 1987 for conducting unauthorized drug trials. Project Mindbridge was funded through a complex network of shell companies ultimately connected to 3 pharmaceutical corporations that were developing next-generation psychiatric medications. The missing students weren't victims of a random crime. They were test subjects in an illegal drug trial studying the effects of experimental compounds on developing brains. The research focused on creating compliant, high-functioning individuals who could be controlled through pharmaceutical manipulation, Agent Chin said. They were trying to develop drugs that would create the perfect students, the perfect children of elite families. The 12 students had been selected not just for their academic ability, but for their psychological profiles. They were all high achievers from influential families, but psychological evaluations showed they had underlying anxiety, depression, or behavioral issues that made them suitable for pharmaceutical intervention. They targeted troubled kids from powerful families, Agent Chin explained. Kids whose parents would be grateful for any treatment that made their children more manageable and successful. The archived documents contain detailed records of what happened to each of the 12 students over the course of several months following their disappearance. The advanced cognitive development sessions had been preliminary psychological evaluations. The real experimentation began after the students were moved to the hidden facility beneath Founders Hall on November 15, 1992. Phase 1. Isolation and conditioning, November-December 1992. Students were kept in individual chambers and subjected to sensory deprivation, sleep disruption, and psychological pressure designed to break down their existing personality structures. Phase 2. Pharmaceutical testing, January-March 1993. Experimental drugs were administered in various combinations to test their effects on memory, behavior, and cognitive function. The compounds were designed to increase academic performance while reducing independent thinking and rebellious behavior. Phase 3. Behavioral modification, April-June 1993. Students who responded well to the drugs were subjected to intensive psychological conditioning designed to create compliant, high-achieving individuals who would return to their families as improved versions of themselves. But the project didn't go according to plan. 7 of the students showed severe adverse reactions to the experimental drugs, including psychotic episodes, seizures, and complete personality disintegration. Rather than risk exposure by seeking medical treatment, the researchers let them die and disposed of the bodies in the facility's crematorium. 3 students appeared to respond well to the conditioning but retained enough awareness to pose a security risk. They were eliminated as well. 2 students, Sarah Blackwood and David Ashford, not only survived the experimentation but seemed to thrive under the new pharmaceutical regimen. They became what the researchers called successful subjects, compliant, high-functioning, and completely controllable. The most disturbing revelation in the Project Mindbridge files was that not all of the students had died in the facility. Sarah Blackwood and David Ashford had been graduated from the program and returned to their families with carefully constructed cover stories. The families were told their children had been found, Agent Chin explained. They were given false explanations about where they'd been and what had happened to them. The children themselves had no memory of the experimentation due to the drugs and psychological conditioning. Sarah Blackwood was returned to her family in March 1993 with the story that she had suffered a psychological breakdown and had been receiving treatment at a private psychiatric facility. Her personality was noticeably different, more compliant, less independent, but her family was told this was the result of therapy and medication for her condition. David Ashford was returned in April 1993 with a similar story. His family was told he had been suffering from depression and anxiety that had caused him to run away, and that he had been receiving treatment that had dramatically improved his condition. Both families were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements as part of their children's treatment, preventing them from discussing the disappearance or asking questions about the missing months. The families were grateful to have their children back, Agent Chin said. They didn't ask too many questions about what had happened because they were told their kids were now cured of their psychological problems. The 2 returned students went on to live seemingly normal lives. Sarah Blackwood graduated from Ashworth, attended Yale, and became a federal prosecutor. David Ashford also graduated, went to Harvard, and became a successful pharmaceutical executive. But the archived files revealed a darker truth. Both remained in regular contact with their handlers, receiving ongoing pharmaceutical treatments and psychological monitoring throughout their adult lives. They weren't cured, Agent Chin explained. They were controlled. The successful subjects of Project Mindbridge became lifelong assets of the people who had experimented on them. The FBI investigation into Project Mindbridge revealed that Ashworth Academy wasn't an isolated case. The pharmaceutical companies funding the research had conducted similar operations at elite private schools across the country. Between 1985 and 1995, at least 12 prestigious boarding schools had reported unexplained student disappearances followed by rapid institutional cover-ups. The pattern was always the same. High-achieving students from influential families would vanish without a trace, their families would receive substantial financial settlements, and the cases would be quickly closed without real investigation. It was a systematic program of human experimentation targeting the children of America's most powerful families, Agent Chin said. They weren't just testing drugs, they were creating a generation of controllable leaders. The network included Phillips Academy, Andover, Massachusetts. 8 students disappeared, 1987. Groton School, Connecticut. 6 students disappeared, 1989. St. Paul School, New Hampshire 14 students disappeared, 1991. Choate Rosemary Hall, Connecticut 10 students disappeared, 1993. Hotchkiss School, Connecticut 7 students disappeared, 1994. In each case, the missing students were from families with connections to politics, finance, or industry. In each case, substantial settlements were paid to ensure family silence. And in each case, a small number of students were eventually found and returned to their families with altered personalities and no memory of their experiences. They were creating sleeper agents, Agent Chen concluded. Children who would grow up to be leaders in politics, business, and society, but who could be controlled through ongoing pharmaceutical and psychological manipulation. The most shocking discovery in the Project Mindbridge files was that the program had never really ended. The experimental phase conducted in the 1990s had been a pilot program to develop techniques that were then applied on a much larger scale. Sarah Blackwood, now 49 and serving as a federal prosecutor in Washington, D.C., had no conscious memory of her time in the underground facility at Ashworth Academy. But cell phone records showed she made monthly calls to the same number that had been used by Project Mindbridge handlers in the 1990s. David Ashford, now 49 and serving as CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had a prescription history showing ongoing use of experimental psychiatric medications that weren't available to the general public. The successful subjects weren't just returned to their families, Agent Chen explained. They were embedded in key positions throughout society as controllable assets. When FBI agents attempted to interview Sarah Blackwood about the Project Mindbridge documents, she claimed no knowledge of any experimentation and threatened to file federal charges against the investigators for harassment. When agents tried to interview David Ashford, his company's legal team obtained an injunction preventing any contact with him or his family. They're still being protected, Agent Chen said. 32 years later, the same forces that covered up Project Mindbridge are still active, still protecting their assets. The investigation revealed that at least 47 alumni of elite boarding schools who had been reported missing in the 1980s and 1990s were now serving in key positions in government, finance, and industry. All showed similar patterns of personality changes, ongoing pharmaceutical treatments, and connections to the same network of handlers and controllers. It's not just historical human experimentation, Agent Chen concluded. It's an ongoing conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in America. As the FBI investigation into Project Mindbridge expanded, the familiar pattern of cover-up and obstruction began again. Agent Chen's investigation was suddenly transferred to a different jurisdiction. Key evidence was classified as national security material and removed from the case file. Witnesses began refusing to cooperate or recanting their previous statements. The same forces that protected this conspiracy in 1992 are still active today, Agent Chen said in his final report before being reassigned to a desk job in Montana. The children who were experimented on have grown up to become the adults who are now protecting the secret. Mike Torres, the contractor who discovered the hidden facility, found his construction company blacklisted from government contracts. Dr. Margaret Whitman, the former Ashworth teacher who spoke to investigators, died in a car accident 3 weeks after giving her testimony. The families of the original missing students, those who were still alive, began receiving legal threats and cease and desist orders preventing them from discussing the case publicly. It's the same playbook they used 30 years ago, said investigative journalist Sarah Connor, who attempted to report on the new revelations. Threaten, pay off, or eliminate anyone who tries to expose the truth. Connor's article about Project Mindbridge was killed by her editor at the Washington Post. When she tried to publish it elsewhere, she was sued for defamation by a legal team representing multiple parties with interests in protecting personal privacy and national security. The story is too big and too dangerous, Connor admitted. The people involved have too much power, and the implications are too disturbing for any major media outlet to touch. In December 2024, Ashworth Academy announced that the renovation of Founders Hall had been canceled due to structural issues that make the building unsafe for continued use. The building was slated for demolition in early 2025. The FBI investigation into Project Mindbridge was officially closed due to insufficient evidence to pursue federal charges. All materials related to the case were classified and sealed for 75 years. The Connecticut State Attorney General's office announced that no state crimes had been committed, since all alleged activities had occurred more than 30 years ago and were beyond the statute of limitations. Dr. Martin Russo, the scientist behind Project Mindbridge, was never located. FBI sources suggested he had died in 2018, though no death certificate was ever found. Sarah Blackwood received a promotion to Deputy Attorney General. David Ashford's pharmaceutical company signed a $2 billion contract with the Department of Defense to develop next-generation psychiatric medications for military use. The 12 students who disappeared from Ashworth Academy in 1992 remain officially listed as missing persons. Their families continue to honor the non-disclosure agreements they signed decades ago. But sometimes, late at night, maintenance workers at elite boarding schools across New England report hearing sounds from sealed basement areas. Voices of children calling for help, footsteps in empty corridors, and the hum of machinery that shouldn't exist. The buildings remember even when the people choose to forget. And in the hidden files of pharmaceutical companies and government agencies, new names are added to target lists. The children of today's most powerful families, selected for academic excellence, psychological vulnerability, and their potential to become tomorrow's controllable leaders. Project Mindbridge never ended. It evolved. The missing students of Ashworth Academy weren't just victims of a historical crime. They were the first successful test of a system that continues to operate today, creating controllable leaders who will shape America's future while believing they're making their own choices. The most terrifying truth about the boarding school silence isn't what happened to those 12 students in 1992. It's what's still happening to children today. The end. Subscribe to Lost Mystery Stories for more cases of institutional cover-ups, human experimentation, and the dark secrets hidden within America's most prestigious institutions. Because sometimes the greatest dangers come from the places we trust most to protect our children.